Welcome back to our anchor desk in New York City. I'm Cynthia McFadden. If you're just joining us, we've been covering a trial from California all morning. The trial began in August and concluded just yesterday with a verdict. We'll continue our coverage of the trial with closing arguments and then show you what happened in court yesterday when the jury returned from 7 days of deliberations before the jury.
Tom Metzger, your host for Race and Reason.
Tom Metzger may be one of the country's most unusual talk show hosts. His show, Race and Reason, promotes hatred of Jews and minorities and is broadcast on 31 public access cable channels nationwide. Metzger, who once headed the California Ku Klux Klan and founded WAR, the White Aryan Resistance, thinks Adolf Hitler would make a better president than George Bush.
There's nothing I've heard about Adolf Hitler that could compare to these idiots that we've got. I mean, they might have said he was brutal and ruthless, but he was efficient and professional, and he took people out of the garbage cans and gave them a great nation again. These boobs like Bush, they're presiding over the destruction of Western civilization. So obviously he'd be a much better choice. Even Benito Mussolini would be.
The Anti-Defamation League's Morris Cassuto says Metzger is not to be taken lightly. Cassuto says he is a catalyst for hate and violence.
Metzger is very dangerous. He is the ideological and philosophical justification for the violence others perpetrate on so-called minority groups. He serves as the justification. He serves as the catalyst. He gives a rationale so that skinheads and other types can go out and bash the heads in of people they don't like. He, in fact, is the philosopher, if you will, of the hate movement.
Metzger is being prosecuted criminally for the first time in his life. He and 3 other Klan and neo-Nazi sympathizers are on trial in Los Angeles for an alleged illegal cross-burning 7 years ago. But it was just 9 months ago that a jury found Metzger liable in a civil suit in connection with the skinhead slaying of an Ethiopian man. An Oregon jury found Metzger, his group, and 2 skinheads liable for $12.5 million.
And they can hammer me, which they're doing, and take my house and close down my business, take my tools. But that only makes me more radical. I mean, but not to the point of playing into their hands and becoming a violent, crazy man. I will ultimately win because I will not fall into that trap. So I'll continue to take the punch, just like Rocky. I'll take the punch, I'll hit the canvas, I'll get back up, and they can try to punch again, but I won't quit.
Metzger spreads his message of racism and hate through a telephone hotline and newspaper. Of this ad, on the back of one issue, Metzger said,
I think it's a funny cartoon.
Why is it funny?
Because it has a lot of reality.
Away here, we're going to continue our coverage now of this cross-burning case from California by showing you the closing statements presented by the lawyers for both sides. Just over a week ago, the jury began its deliberations after they had heard these closing statements. Let's listen now as the state makes its final argument to the jury.
That these people are trying to say here, and the witnesses that they've presented, that the neighboring residents did not know what was going on. That's absolute nonsense. And this brings me to the last witness I want to talk about. This is, in a lot of respects, what this case is all about. Yes, we have the fire code provisions, and that's the basis for the violations in 2 laws. We have another charge, which is an unlawful assembly. An unlawful assembly can be proved in either of 2 ways. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But one of the prongs, one of the theories upon which the people can prove that an unlawful assembly has occurred is by showing that 2 or more persons gathered together to engage in conduct which was violent, boisterous, or tumultuous in nature. Tumultuous meaning that it was reasonably likely to excite terror, disturb the peace of the neighborhood, and words to that effect as you will be instructed by this court when all the arguments are done. Now, Mr. Buttrey described circumstances that night where he, from his bedroom window, can see the glow of crosses, or the glow of flames, as the crosses were inflamed. And he came downstairs, and there, he said, were 50 or 60 people half of whom were children. Others testified, who went to the front of the property, Mr. Buttrey did not, that there were a dozen or 15 neighborhood residents up at the front along Cable Canyon, about at the backside of the property from which Mr. Buttrey and Mr. Walker had walked towards the glowing flames. He said that half of those 50 or 60 people along his street in Lakeview Terrace were children. You know, these things, when one empathizes and puts themselves in the position of the people who were witnesses, who saw what was happening that night, have got to be acknowledged as actions which create lasting emotional scar. Those are the victims. They're not alleged in any portion of the complaint as victims, but those are the real victims that are involved in this case. And the proper presentation of this case includes that type of aspect. It includes the second prong of the unlawful assembly. And again, one must consider what would have befallen Mr. Buttrey and Mr. Walker had they not been stopped by Officer Lopez in time as they walked towards those three burning crosses, men carrying these table legs. This jury has a right and it has a responsibility to protect the residents of this city, this county, and this state. And that is the focus of who the protection extends to in this situation. And it extends to...
Let me ask you another question, because you raised the question of the prosecutor, and the prosecutor in this case is unusual. Mr. Phillips was hired, was retained by the state, he's in private practice now, to come in as a special prosecutor, essentially, and try this case for the state. First of all, that is relatively unusual, and any thoughts about why it might have worked this way?
I really can't say. It is unusual to bring in special prosecutors, but that's not to say it doesn't occur. It occurs in most states for a variety of reasons. Special prosecutors are brought in. They're generally brought in, however, where for example, say one of the someone closely associated with the prosecutor's office is involved in the investigation or the crime itself. The decision to re-prosecute this case will not be Mr. Phillips, I don't believe. He may have input in the decision, sure, but it'll be the local top county prosecutor himself who's going to make that decision. And it will obviously be, in some sense, a decision that will have to weigh all the factors that we talked about.
Well, it is an interesting trial, and I thank you for your expert commentary on it.